Velkommen og god dag alle sammen. I'm making a very special and long video today. Norse paganism and Asatru have exploded in the last few years. Ever since the Vikings TV show came out, everyone wants to get runes tattooed and worship the Norse gods and pretend to be a Viking and go to Valhalla and all that. And as a Norwegian and as someone who has been reading about the Norse gods and myths since I learned how to read when I was like 5 years old, it makes me, it's funny, but it also makes me happy and proud that so many people want to learn more. But I always see a lot of people asking if it's okay for them to get into Norse paganism, if they're not Scandinavian. It is a religion based on ancestral worship and nature and homeland and sacred places and the home of your ancestors. And that is true. People ask about this, but it's true. If you want to get into paganism, you should maybe look into your own heritage before you look at another type of paganism. You should find something more related to your homeland. However, one thing that people don't know is exactly how far the Norse and Germanic paganism reached. It was absolutely not confined to just Scandinavia. Really, every country in Europe had some contact with the Germanic pagans. So there is a very good chance that if you have any European heritage at all, that you might have a tiny little bit of Germanic pagan blood into you, and there might be a chance that your ancestors also worshipped the Germanic gods. So this is what I'm going to do in this video. I'm going over every European country, and I'm going to talk about times and periods where Germanic pagans had some contact with your homeland, the land of your heritage. And this is going to be a really long video, so I'm putting up a screen here, which you can fast forward to your country if you like, if you don't want to watch the whole thing. But if you do want to watch the whole thing, it would be a good thing because everything would make a whole lot more sense like that. So just keep in mind, most of you already know, but some people are a bit behind. They don't know about it. But the Norse myths, the Norse beliefs, the Norse paganism, the religion of the Vikings is a Germanic pagan religion. They are not two different things. Just like the Old Norse language evolved from Proto-Germanic, the Norse pagan religion evolved from the Germanic pagan religion. Okay, so I just had to clear that up for those of you who don't know, and we'll get right into it. Here are the countries. So first we will look at Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. Of course, I'm not going to go into the full history of this, of the Germanic pagan religion here, because we all know this. They are a Germanic pagan religious area. Scandinavia, they always have been, as far back as we have records of religion at least. The areas of Scandinavia always worshiped the Germanic gods and spoke Germanic language as far back as we know, as far back as we have recorded evidence. The only difference between Scandinavian and the area here in northern Germany in this map is that there would have been a split sometime around the migration period from about the 300s to the 500s, where they evolved into two different languages. So the Scandinavians would have slowly started to speak Proto-Nordic and eventually Old Norse, whereas the mainland Germanic tribes, the places that you see here in northern Germany, they would have evolved into Old Saxon or Old Dutch or Old High German or any other language like that. That's why we see the Norse god, his name is Odin, and the Germanic name for him was Woden or Wotan. But it's ultimately the same religion. There's probably some little regional differences and in the practices and things like that, but it was the same religion, same people at one point in time. Iceland, too, was Norse pagan, but it wasn't even settled until the 800s. But eventually Scandinavia was Christianized around the year 1000. Depending on which area. I won't go into any more detail about this because that's what I talk about in pretty much every other video on my channel, but I'll go into some other countries now. Let's take our neighbors. Finland. They have their own language and religion, and it's actually not related to the Germanic culture at all. But even though the people are very close together in its location, there are neighbors, and they're very similar genetically. We don't really have a lot of records of Germanic paganism in Finland, but without a doubt, The Norse and Germanic gods would have been worshipped there a little bit. They are right on the border of Sweden and had really close contact with the people of Scandinavia forever, really. So the Finns had their own pagan religion, but there would for sure be some people who lived in Finland from Scandinavia and practiced the native Germanic pagan religion, and they lived peacefully together. We have a lot of mentions of this in the sagas, actually. Also, on another note, Finland was, I think, the last country in all of Europe to convert to Christianity. It was in the 1200s sometime, so they had a beautiful, strong pagan culture, longer than anyone else in Europe, really. And Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania, kind of in the same region. They would have been similar to Finland. They would have had a lot of contact with the Vikings and the Norse pagans there, but I'll go into those countries a little bit later. Next country, we will do Germany. Yes, absolutely, of course, Germany was an area where the Germanic pagan religion was practiced, but it was only really northern Germany who worshipped the Germanic gods. You can see from this map here that I'll put up that this was the area that was worshipped, that worshipped the Germanic gods. The rest of Germany, along with most of Europe at that time, actually was originally Celtic. Then later on, they definitely had some Roman influence with the Roman gods and eventually Christianity. And it wasn't until the migration period, starting in the 300s, that people from the north of Germany who worshipped the Germanic gods came into this region. These were tribes like the Suebi, Alemanni, Vandals, and lots more little tribes like that. Also, this area got pretty screwed over by the Huns, and they were forced to migrate west and to other places there. But there was definitely some Germanic pagan religion here, but only for a few hundred years. And southern Germany was probably quite a religiously diverse area. They had maybe some Roman gods there. They had definitely the native Celtic religion, and eventually the Germanic religion came into southern Germany as well. But northern Germany, however, different story. This was always an area who worshipped the Germanic gods as far back as we have records, just like the Scandinavians. And actually, this area remained pagan a lot longer than most people think. The northern Germanic tribes were tough bastards, and they lived in these very, very dense forests, and the Romans were terrified, and the Romans never really broke through into this Germanic pagan area. They tried, and they kind of conquered everything around there, but they never broke into this area in the northern Germany, this pagan Germanic area. And the people did not officially become Christian until Charlemagne came in from France and ruined everything in about the year 800. But even after that, we have a lot of evidence that paganism continued privately for a long time after that. So that is the short version of paganism in Germany, and I'll speak a lot more about that in other videos, but we'll move on to other countries now. Next one, neighbor, Poland. Yes, absolutely. There would have been Germanic pagans living in the area. Not a whole lot, but definitely a good chunk of history and a good chunk of Poland that there would have been Germanic pagans there. There are parts you'll see in this map, looks like northeastern Poland, that were definitely a Germanic pagan area originally. And you even see, even today in the north west of Poland, it's the northwest of Poland. You see a lot of German influence there. It looks a lot like Germany. But the rest of the country, not so much Germanic pagan settlement and influence. However, we have a period where Poland was settled by another Germanic tribe, and that was the Goths, who migrated this way in large numbers in about the 200s to 300s. These were Swedish people, as you'll see in this map here. These were the Goths originally. And in the 200s to 300s, these people moved down south at the start of the migration period. They settled and mixed, and they spread, and they became what is known as the Thervingi or the Groithingi, to name a couple of peoples. The shaded portion in red here was known as the Vibok culture, and that was, most scholars believe, they're pretty mysterious there, but most of them believe that it was a very heavily Gothic influenced for a certain time, and you can see there in this map also how they spread out. And these were all Swedish pagan settlers, the Goths, coming in really, really large numbers actually and settling. Moving on a little bit further south into Czech Republic and Slovakia, or Czechoslovakia, however you want to call it. Yes, absolutely here as well. You can see in this map again that similar to Poland, the lands here were settled by the Goths from Sweden in about the 300s. So definitely there, strong Germanic pagan influence. Move a little bit further, Belarus. This is Belarus, also the same. You see here around this whole area, coming down south from Sweden, the Goths settled all around and mixed and mingled with the people and brought their Germanic pagan religion with them. And if you move in south here, a little bit further to Ukraine, you can see the same. Lots of massive movement by the Goths coming down south and settling all the way back into Ukraine. Also Moldova and Romania even, a bit later on in time. So you see in this map Moldova and even a good chunk of Romania. That's surprising to many people because these countries don't seem very Nordic. However, even today, 2,000 years later almost, you find a lot of people in these areas with light hair and blue eyes actually, which is surprising to some people who haven't been there. I've been there, and I can definitely say it's true. There are large chunks of people there who definitely look like they have some Scandinavian. Just keep in mind when the Goths traveled from Poland all the way down to these areas, they mixed pretty quickly, and they adapted the native religions and of the people where they settled at, and Christianity pretty soon after that as well. So the Germanic pagan beliefs would probably not have existed here very long, maybe only 100 or 200 years, but it definitely did exist here. You can see from this map the places that were closer to Gotland or Sweden, the land of the Goths, where they first started migrating. These would have had a longer history of Germanic pagan worship and religious practice. And the further away we get down here to the Black Sea, the more it would have faded. So probably very, very strong Germanic pagan history in Poland, and less as we get down further to the Black Sea, for example. Moving on a little bit more. This is a long video. I don't think I ever talked this long in my life, but we'll keep going. Greece. We don't see a lot of evidence of Germanic pagan religion being practiced here. We know that they had some contact with them, but this was maybe from a bit earlier in time. But we do know that the Goths, just like I spoke about, came there in the 300s to 400s and settled a little bit, but by this time we're pretty sure that they had lost their pagan beliefs. But there may have been some trace of Germanic paganism in Greece. Turkey would be the same. They also settled here, and we'll go on here to the Balkans. There's lots of different countries there, of course. Long history, lots of mixing and different things going on there throughout thousands of years. But here we see kind of the same thing, massive migration and settlement by the Goths. But I'll just show you this map to give you an idea. I mean, the Goths were all over the damn place around this time. So yes, there was probably a whole lot of Gothic and Swedish DNA and blood around these areas at the time. But they had already been mixing with other peoples in Eastern Europe for 100 or 200 years maybe. So their Germanic religion was probably not still with them by that time. So although a lot of these areas definitely have Germanic or Scandinavian genes, there was probably not a time where the Germanic gods were worshipped there, at least not in really big numbers, clearly. On to the next area, we'll do Italy. Same thing here. The Goths, like I said, they were everywhere. That's what the migration period was called. It's because people just migrated the hell out of everywhere, and especially the Goths. They just traveled everywhere. They came here too, to Italy, but it was even later than Greece and all these other areas in Eastern Europe. For sure, the Goths had lost their pagan beliefs by the time they got to Italy. They had mixed with lots of different people, and then just kept moving. However, we do see one pretty cool thing, that these Goths were followed into Italy and other areas of the Roman Empire by some other Germanic tribes called the Herulian, Rugian, and Scyrian. And here's a map showing where they were coming from. So even though the Goths were no longer Germanic pagan by the time that they invaded Rome, probably, they were accompanied by large numbers of Germanic peoples who were for sure still pagan. And a few years later on, there were people called the Ostrogoths who were actually settled in Italy, and they were there for sure for quite a while, and we can see traces of Germanic pagan relief still in their culture. Then finally. There was another massive immigration of Germanic tribes into northern Italy in the 500s. It was mainly the Lombards, but also the Herulians, Swabians, and quite a few other Germanic tribes. So the northern part of Italy would have had massive numbers of people coming in who still worshiped the Germanic gods. The whole area Christianized, and not too long after that, but there would have been maybe 50 to 100 years where Germanic paganism would have been practiced a little bit in this area in northern Italy, but not too long before the Christianization. So Austria, Switzerland, and Liechtenstein, I won't leave you out. I'll do all these three together because they're kind of similar region, have a similar history. These areas were originally Celtic, but had a lot of contact with Rome for a long time, so they would have had kind of a hybrid culture for a while. There would have been the Celtic gods, there would have been the Roman gods, kind of celebrated and living together, and eventually Christianity, but here in Austria, Switzerland, Liechtenstein, we also see the same thing happening here that we see in other places in the migration period. A lot of Germanic tribes, like the Lombards, especially when they moved south towards Italy, they would have been passed through this area and settled in large numbers in Austria, Switzerland, and all of that. And the areas that were mainly Celtic Roman with some Christian influence, but probably 100 or 200 years after this area was settled by the Germanic tribes before they were Christianized. So the Germanic gods were for sure worshipped here as well. The specific tribes settling in Switzerland were mainly the Burgundians and the Alemanni. In Austria, it would have been the Alemanni, Vandals, and different Goths, and probably some smaller tribes as well. So definitely some Germanic paganism there. On to Spain. That's a long video. Again, in Spain, the Goths came here in large numbers and the kind of mid-migration period, and they set up a kingdom there, actually. So I think the Goths kept moving around Europe. Then they found Spain, and they said, oh, I like it here. We'll set up a massive kingdom, and these were the Visigoths. So yes, these were a lot of Goths and Swedish people who migrated here in large numbers originally, but by this time they would have been mixing with people all over Eastern Europe and Southern Europe and all over the place before they got to Spain for a couple hundred years. So for sure they lost their pagan beliefs, although they probably kept quite a lot of their Germanic language, actually, for the most part, and for sure maybe kept some pagan traditions, but they were definitely not Germanic pagan by the time they reached Spain, although some of their traditions may have survived, and the Visigoths were also settled in southern France as well here. So, on to the next one. France. Yes, France, absolutely. There was a lot of Germanic pagan settlement there. First of all, there was that Visigothic kingdom that I just mentioned in the south of France, but also a massive number of Germanic people, migrated into France, and these people were called the Franks. People forget that sometimes, that France was actually called Gaul originally. They were the Gauls, Gallic peoples. And the people living there were a Celtic people with a Celtic religion and language. Then, starting in about the 200s, a Germanic tribe called the Franks migrated into Gaul and settled in incredibly large numbers and pretty much pushed out all the Celtic culture completely, or at least mixed with them so much that the Celtic paganism slowly disappeared. But the Franks were they were Germanic tribes, and they were pagans originally, but they were kind of the errand boys of Rome. They moved into France, and after that, they did kind of the Romans' bidding whenever the Romans asked, whenever the Roman emperor, when it came to war or laws or religion to be put into place, the Franks just kind of accepted it and enforced whatever the Romans told them to. So not long after the Franks moved from the Germanic areas into France, they all converted to Christianity when the Romans did. But there would have been a period, 100 or 200 years or so, where the main religion in France was Germanic paganism, or kind of a mix between Germanic pagans and Celtic pagans. Then fast forward a few hundred years, also in France, and France got a third wave of Germanic pagan migration, and that's when the Vikings came. This is the story that most of us know of. The Vikings brought their Norse religion and settled in large numbers in Normandy. And that's where the Normans come from. That's, for the most part, they were Vikings that settled there and mixed with the native people. But unfortunately, all the Vikings converted to Christianity pretty much immediately after they moved here. But pretty sure from some evidence that the Vikings here practiced paganism in private for a little bit. We have some evidence for this, but that's a very long story, and I won't go into that all in this video. So we'll go to a neighbor here. That's Belgium. Belgium is pretty much the same kind of area and culture as France originally there, so you'll see from this map. They were originally a place where the Celtic language and religion was practiced, and then they became Christian right when the rest of Rome and France did, a little after the 300s. But Belgium was so close to the Germanic area, and for sure these people here would have been a beautiful mix originally of Germanic and Celtic people. They would have been a beautiful mix of people for a very long time there, right on the border. Also, during the migration period, we know that the Jutes especially came and migrated in large numbers into the Belgium area. So you can see in this map here that the Jutes are Danes. So yes, Belgium also would have had a big Germanic pagan community there for a large part of their history, and you know, there's probably a lot of you guys have Danish DNA there. On to the next country. Netherlands, same thing. I'll show this map, which is commonly accepted as the Germanic versus Celtic tribal and cultural borders, and you'll see it kind of cuts right through the middle of the Netherlands here. So same as Belgium, they would have been a beautiful mix of Germanic and Celtic pagan culture for a very long time. And also a note that this area was one of the last areas of mainland Europe to Christianize, especially the Frisian area. These areas really didn't Christianize officially until the reign of Charlemagne around the year 800, and these people fought hard against it. They went through a lot of pain and suffering actually defending their pagan religion, these people of the Netherlands and the northwestern Germany area. We have a lot of evidence that they continued to practice paganism in private for a long time after this, even though they were getting killed and tortured for practicing their pagan religion. So these people have all my love and respect. Even today, Dutch people are some of my favorites. So on to the next country there. England, moving up into the British Isles. So, as you know, the Vikings conquered and settled in the British Isles starting in the 800s, and they owned a big chunk of England at one point. It was called the Danelaw. A big chunk of England was actually just a Danish colony, really. So there would have been a huge influence of the Norse pagan religion being practiced here then. But what most people forget, there was actually an even larger settlement of people coming from a Germanic tribal area, and that was the Anglo-Saxons. The Anglo-Saxons are actually not English at all. They were from northern Germany and Denmark, like you see on this map here. Britain was originally a Celtic area all around. But in about the year to the 300s to 400s, the tribes from this region in Denmark and Germany, the Angles and the Saxons, started migrating into England in such large numbers that they pretty much pushed out all of the Celtic language and religion. So England was just, at that time, a massive German pagan tribal area from about the late 300s till about the 600s, when most of the country was Christianized officially. But we have evidence of them worshiping the Germanic gods in private for quite a while after this, so for a couple hundred years later even. And then, in the year 800, a few hundred years later, they came into contact with the Vikings, who brought a slightly different Germanic religion there. But then that lasted as well, as we've seen, for quite a while. So massive Germanic pagan history in England. And that's definitely part of their culture, even though we don't. That's not the common belief. Next countries, Ireland and Scotland. I'll do these together because they have a pretty similar story. So when the Anglo-Saxon Germanic tribes came up and they settled all over England, starting in the 300s, they never really made it up to Scotland or Ireland. Also, the Romans never really made it into Scotland or Ireland. It took the Romans a very, very long time to get Christianity accepted in Scotland and Ireland. So Scottish and Irish are some more tough bastards, and they may be the best people that ever existed, that were good at defending against invaders. I mean, the Romans were terrified of them. The Anglo-Saxons, they just ran over England and got rid of the Britons there, but they just could not make it into Scotland or Ireland. They were just Scottish and the Irish were just really, really incredibly tough at defending their homelands. So they were actually the last people in the world to be speaking the Celtic language and worshiping the Celtic gods. But eventually they did Christianize, and although I think their pagan Celtic religion was practiced, it was practiced quite a bit longer than most scholars estimate. Then also, like in England, they had big waves of Vikings coming in to settle, starting in the 800s, and the Vikings brought their Germanic gods with them. So it would not have been worshipped for very long, but it was definitely there. And people for sure practiced Norse pagan religion in private for a long time in Ireland and Scotland. That's what we're sure of. Almost done. Damn, let's get into half an hour. We'll finish up some countries in Eastern Europe. We'll speak about Russia, Belarus, Ukraine, and the Baltic ones, Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania. Yes, all of those places were settled by the Vikings, and they would have brought their Germanic religion with them. But it would have not been in very big numbers. We all know about the Vargarian Vikings, or the Rus. They traveled all the way down from Sweden. Most people believe the Rus comes from Sweden. They traveled down the Volga River and came into tons of contact with all the people along the way, and we have records of these Rus people still practicing their pagan religion while they were living there in Eastern Europe. But they, also like the Goths did a few hundred years earlier, they seem like they mixed in very quickly with the native people, and the Germanic pagan religion would have been lost pretty quickly. So in these Eastern European countries, yes, there was a big Germanic pagan religion practiced, but it was probably not even practiced for 100 years, really, in small numbers, even though that there was a lot of migration, and this area in Eastern Europe has a lot of Scandinavian DNA there. So why is this? Well, it's because there were mostly men and warriors and traders traveling down to this area and other places similar to this. So if a woman accompanies the man, the native religion would have survived a lot longer. Think about it. If you're a Viking man and you see a pretty Russian girl here, you would think, oh, well, I know she's Christian and I want my kids to be raised Norse pagan, but I've been on a boat with 50 men for months at a time now, and I'm horny. All right, so he would have banged that pretty Russian girl, and he would have gotten married to her and supported the family, but he would have been away trading or working or fighting most of the time. So the Russian mother would not have taught the children Old Norse, and she would not have taught them about the Norse gods. Let's look on the opposite side, something different. Say a Viking man has a Scandinavian Viking wife, and they settle in England or even Iceland. Well, their kids and their grandkids and many generations to come would have been raised the pagan way. It's because their mother and their father were there teaching them about the pagan ways. That's why we see in some places where pagans settle, the religion dies out in one generation. And other places, it survives hundreds of years or more. So one little last part of Germanic religion and migration is in the Mediterranean. We'll speak about a little bit more about Spain, Italy, Africa, Greece, Balkans, that area there, all around the coastline, Turkey, everything down there in the Mediterranean. Yes, we do know that the Vikings traveled down there, and a lot of them probably settled down there too, but it would have been in small numbers. The Vikings for sure came here and brought their religion, but it would have not lasted very long because of the first reason that I just told you, the men migrating here and not bringing their women to pass down those traditions. And also the second reason, the Mediterranean was too damn hot for them. All right. So this is actually why we see a lot more migration south from the Germanic tribal areas in the migration period. From about the 3 to the 600s, is because the migration period, most of the scientists believe this was a very, very cold couple hundred years in history. The people in Scandinavia were probably freezing to death, and crops were dying, and they were getting killed, and they just didn't have enough food to support everybody because it was too cold. They couldn't grow food or anything. So they migrated south, and their wives and children and everyone accompanied them. Like the Goths, going all the way to Turkey and Spain and all of that. Went all the way south and reached these places. The Viking Age, however, which is from about the 800s to the 1000s, was actually a much warmer period. It was about as warm as we have it today, or somewhere near that. I forget the exact temperature, but the Viking Age was actually very, very warm. This is why we see Scandinavians migrating more closer to the northern areas. First, because the weather at the time was perfect for farming, and a lot more people would have survived due to better food and more crops and just better weather in general. So Scandinavia got a bit too full. Too many people were surviving, and then they migrated to places like the Faroe Islands and Scotland and Iceland and Greenland, because these places at that time would have been pretty pleasant weather, even though they're not now. But the reason they probably did not migrate and settle in big numbers in the south in the Viking Age is because it was too damn hot for them. They would have melted and died out, and I think I am a perfect example of this. I'm Norwegian, as far back as we have family records, but I've lived in California for big chunks of my life, and I lived in Greece also for some time too, and I have the scars to prove it. I got a big scar here, I got one here, I got one here, and my back is all cut to bits. I have scars everywhere from surgery. It's skin cancer. No, I'm not a surfer dude at all. I'm not out in the sun every day. I never have been. I don't get out in the sun too often, and I still got all of this skin cancer. So the Vikings would have been the same. Our pasty white Norwegian asses would have not been able to stare in the Mediterranean sun in the Viking Age. It was too hot, and they probably would have all died of skin cancer or just been like, oh man, it's too sweaty. I'm not doing this anymore. I'm going home. So that's why we see a lot of Scandinavian and Germanic migration south in the migration period, because it was cold, but not in the Viking Age because it was a warm time. So that's about it. Video's finally over. That is like 35 minutes almost. That was not pleasant, but I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope I didn't miss any countries. I covered the most parts, at least, the important parts of the migration period and the Viking migration and everything like that. So I hope that helps. I hope you look into your own heritage and your own culture and where your family comes from, and you can see that you maybe actually do have some Scandinavian or Germanic DNA in you. So even though Germanic pagan religion may not have been practiced in your region for very long, definitely it probably was practiced there for a little bit. So all of this has that. So I would say if you do have heritage in any part of Europe, you have at least a little bit of DNA and a little bit of possibility that your ancestors worship the Germanic gods, and so you can too. So that's about it for this video. Vi ses nästa gång.